Welcome to Jakarta EE 11 and beyond. I'm Ryan Cuprak. My contact information is up there. I work for Dassault Systems on chemical formulation software, and I've been using Jakarta EE, Java EE for a long time now, many years, and I'm heavily involved in the Jakarta EE ambassadors, which I'll mention as I go through the presentation. So Jakarta EE 11. So first, Jakarta EE, as I assume everyone's aware, was rebranded a couple of years ago. Back in September of 2017, Oracle announced that they were donating or transitioning Java EE over to the Eclipse Foundation, which was actually great news for the community because it got it out of, basically it opened it up to the community, enabling the community to drive the development of the platform and determine its direction. So 2017, the process was started. By 2019, the first version, Jakarta EE 8, which was just a rebranding of Java EE 8, was released. The name change was due to Oracle not donating the name Java with it, so that is why it transitioned over and became Jakarta, at the Jakarta name, which was donated from the Apache Foundation. So it has an open governance, open source, open compatibility testing. Previously, the compatibility testing was something that you had to pay for. That is now open. You can actually download and run the compatibility test yourself to verify conformance and even contribute to it. So it has a well-defined specification process, a clear IP flow. The key stakeholders are still involved, including Oracle, IBM, and then there's been new ones. So there's London Java Users Group, Omnifish, Sujava, Pyera, etc. So the community, the previous companies that were involved continue to be involved, and we now have brought in new participants into it, and more so from the, the Java user group level as well. So it's been moving along quite nicely. The link at the bottom is for the main Jakarta EE website to get more information on it. Now, Jakarta EE is extremely important to the Java community. Whether you realize it or not. Most Java developers, even if they don't consider themselves Jakarta EE developers, I think in the past there's been a lot of developers have assumed that in order to be a Java EE or a Jakarta EE, you're writing a monolith and deploying it to a container. That's not true. If you're processing JSON in Java, if you're using Hibernate, if you're using any of those technologies, you're using something from Java EE, Jakarta EE. So really, your resume, if you look at most Java resumes out there, they are full of Jakarta EE terms, JPA, JMS, JSF, you name it. Most of the acronyms out there come from, many of the acronyms out there on a Java developer's resume come from Jakarta EE. So it's in our vested interest to make sure that this pushes forward and continues to drive innovation, because it's really key to the Java platform. The survey was actually just released recently, the developer survey for 2024. We have the breakdown in terms of the different technologies that are out there. So Jakarta EE, Spring Boot does use Jakarta EE technology. So although that's usually viewed as kind of like a competing technology, it does use and does contribute to the Jakarta EE platform. It does reuse the technologies. It's not completely self-standing. So this cross-pollination between the two of them, and also micro-profile. So as we can see, the usage of it over just the past year has increased. 25 to 35% of Java applications run on an EE container. That's running a monolithic container. And 70 to 80% of the Java applications that are out there, and I think it actually is probably higher, use at least one of the Jakarta EE APIs. Unless you're doing a straight desktop application, you're probably using one of the Jakarta EE APIs for processing JSON, for making a RESTful web service call. All of that comes from Jakarta EE. And sometimes it's actually surprising how small the team that actually makes all of the technologies that we use, how few people are actually involved in making those decisions and implementing it sometimes. It's really surprising. Now, Java EE, Jakarta EE has been around for over 20 years now. So it's not possible for somebody to have been born and be using Java EE today when it came out before they were born. And although that sounds bad for technology, when you realize that Python and some of the other current hot technologies are actually even older than this, kind of puts it in perspective. So Java EE originally came out as the Java Professionals Edition around 1999. J2EE came out. And although you'll still see people referring to J2EE, that term hasn't been used in probably over 15 years. Hopefully the AI systems, because I still hear lots of people using it, hopefully the AI systems that are processing resumes have picked up on that. And so they're not, you'll see a requirement, must be a, knowledge in J2EE, and it's like nobody's used that term in like 15 years, or 20 years now, actually. So it's really funny how some of these older technologies, the thing gets renamed or something like that, you run into somebody and they still think it's J2EE, or that's what the perspective of it is. So it's evolved over the last, over 25 years now. So Jakarta EE 11 is coming out hopefully next month for the Jakarta 1 stream. So Jakarta EE 8 was the rebranding of Java EE 8. Jakarta EE 9 was primarily for the containers. It was the first release on the new namespace because the namespace wasn't donated by Oracle either, so it had to be renamespaced. So that was done in Jakarta EE 9. So Jakarta EE 10 was the first release with new features to kind of entice developers to go from EE 8 to Jakarta EE 10. It also, upgraded the version of Java. Besides that, so right now we're closing in on the release of Jakarta EE 11, and Jakarta EE 12 is development and discussions of that are now starting. So part of this presentation will be devoted to just talking about what could possibly go into Jakarta EE 12, and there's some exciting things that could go in there. This is a graphic from InfoQ, kind of dividing up the community. So you have your late majority right now, which a lot of developers and companies out there are still on Java EE 8 and Java 8. It's actually amazing sometimes as to how many, since it's been around so long, there's still a lot of applications on EE 8. Most have right now either transitioned to EE 8 or Jakarta EE 9. So there's been heavy uptake now, especially it's being driven by the rapid cadence, the rapid release of Java versions. So that's kind of driving some of the migration forward, is that you're on EE 8 and you need to get to a newer version of Java, so then you upgrade your version of Java in the process. So that's kind of helping drive some of it. This is Jakarta EE 10, and so that's kind of what's going on with the community out there. I'm heavily involved with the Jakarta EE Ambassadors, which is a grassroots organization. We were initially founded to push Jakarta EE forward, so we help onboard developers in terms of guiding them and guiding their contributions into the Eclipse Foundation. How do you get involved? How do you contribute to the platform, etc. So do check us out. We have a guide which is going to be updated soon for contributing to Jakarta EE 12, and the ideas and what can go in there. So that will be updating the WordPress site within the next couple of weeks with that. Now moving on, so Jakarta EE 10 was the first release since EE 8 that introduced new features. So several key things made it into it. So we've of course got CDI continues to expand and will eventually overtake and replace everything that the old enterprise Java beans provided. And it's kind of unifying the platform. So asynchronous was finally made it in. There was better CDI support in batch, as well as, REST didn't make it until 11. Java SE alignment, so there's completion stage and concurrency. There was finally Bootstrap APIs for REST made it in. And then finally closing the standardizations gap, OpenID Connect made it into EE10, along with the managed executor definitions, SQL support. And then finally, that release also began the process of removing some older technologies that not as many developers still use, such as EJB entity beans, which hopefully no one's used in the last 20 years, the embeddable EJB container, and deprecating some of the older things from servlet faces and CDI that are no longer used. Innovation continued, which didn't make it into the final release, but there was continued innovation on some projects, NoSQL, MVC, Jakarta configuration, and also gRPC, which will hopefully be making it in, some of these will hopefully make it into Jakarta EE 12. So Jakarta EE 11, which is what you're here for, Finally, CDI now has support for the scheduling. Also, there were changes, upgrades to persistence and concurrency. Those are some of the major changes. Java SE alignment, adapting to Java records finally, adding support for virtual threads, which was one of the major new features in Java. And work continued on better integrating CDI into REST, but didn't make it into the final release, and also modernizing some of the TCKs. Actually, the delay right now in releasing Jakarta EE 11 was in part to upgrade the TCKs away from Apache Ant to Maven. Also closing the standardization gap in in-memory identity stores. And Jakarta EE 11 continued the process of removing stuff from the platform that many developers aren't using anymore, such as SOAP, JAXB, XML, Corba, and Managed Beans. I'm just going to hear, how many of you have worked with Cobra? It's not, okay. And then continued innovation on, continued on NoSQL, MVC configuration, and gRPC. So the themes for Jakarta EE 11 was the release, so the release is going to be hopefully within the next month. 17.21 is now the baseline for this release. So that means that it's Java 17 and greater. So with this release, support was added for records, virtual threads. The platform also had to contend with a security manager, which was deprecated from Java. This is going to have this is one of those changes coming into the JDK that's going to have a big impact upon the community. So Jakarta EE was out ahead of this. With this release, the security manager has been removed from it. In fact, I think it was just announced that the next version of Java will actually have the security manager removed. So, and there's lots of code out there that still depend upon that, or that will be impacted by that. So their specifications updates were to persistence, concurrency, security, CDI validation, which I'll get into. We have the new specification for data, which was added. And as I mentioned, SOAP, JAXB, XML, and Corba and Managed Beans were removed. So this is a list of the specs. The ones that are in blue are the ones that were updated. The orange one is the first new specification in a while that was added to Jakarta EE. And many of these changes were fairly minor, but data was the first new specification added in a while. And the thing to remember with Jakarta EE is that it is a standard. So it's after things have kind of percolated for a while that something gets standardized with the platform. So the idea is that you then end up with multiple implementations, and the industry is kind of coalesced around a way of doing things. That it's time for when we get to a certain point that we want to standardize something. So Jakarta Persistence 3.2. This specification had probably the biggest set of changes to it, of the changes out there, with the exception of data. So it added support finally for records as embeddable classes, finally support for instance in year. So replacing the Java util date, which hopefully nobody is still using. I know that that's kind of hard to get out of, new date.getTime, I think I see everywhere when somebody's trying to performance monitor code or something like that. It deprecated the use of date, that hideous Java util, Java SQL time that I always run into, timestamp and temporal in favor of the datetime API. Added more SQL-like features in the query language and criteria API. Also added support for a thread-safe entity manager inject, which enables its use more in CDI. And added, finally, a programmatic configuration alternative for persistence.xml, so you can programmatically configure the persistence manager. Going into the future, there's discussion, this is where Jakarta 12 comes in, about making persistence.xml an optional empty marker file so that you don't have to have it. And then adding JCache as a second level cache provider. So if that's something that you think should be added, that's definitely involved with that. Just a short example here demoing embeddable records. As you can see, this is the Java record class. Now you can use this as an embeddable. And there's different ways of also using it with ID, with primary keys. This is an example of using the new programmatic configuration of the persistence configuration. So what you would previously do in that persistence XML, now you can actually do in code. And then there were some improvements to the methods, for example, for being able to create the schema, being able to clear out the database. So, if you have, you have all of your entities and you want to quickly generate the database as a part of your tests, this is definitely an option. There's improvements with transactions. So as you can see here, I'm running some code in, in a transaction. Kind of a different way of doing, much better way of doing things. Okay. And then, as I mentioned, the ability to inject the entity manager, which opens up newer opportunities, and CDI improves its interaction with CDI. So now it's threads. So now it can be done in a type-safe way, and it pairs very well with the @transactional attribute from CDI. Jakarta validation just had minor changes. It now supports validation of Java records. So now you can add your validators onto the Java records classes. Jakarta concurrency, as I mentioned before, has the @scheduled annotation was added. Previously, if you wanted to do scheduling and stay within the platform, you would have used an Enterprise Java Bean and added the @scheduled annotation. Now you can do it with just the Jakarta concurrency framework. Integration with Jakarta Java 9 flows and reactive streams. You can now inject a concurrency resource. And then the big one is support for virtual threads, which is more of a framework level type thing. But you do have the option of specifying that you want to use virtual threads. For future Jakarta 12 discussions about the EJB equivalent of lock, finally getting that into CDI or into the concurrency, and also adding max concurrency. So those are two things that hopefully will be added to 12. So schedule and CDI beans, fairly straightforward. The only caveat with it right now that I don't like is that you have to call it the method at least once to get it scheduled. So you end up with this kind of like boilerplate code here. If it's normal call, if it's a normal or the first call, then just return. If not, then after that, then that's a regular scheduled method. Within the manage executor definition, there's a property that allows you to set true, which means that you want to use the newer Java platform virtual threads. So that enables better scalability. And then an example that I put together of the Java 9 reactive stream support. So as you can see here, I have a little bit of code to read, but it's using an example of using reactive streams within Jakarta EE within Jakarta EE 11. For Jakarta security, there's some basic API changes for handling multiple authentication mechanisms, support for qualifiers, an in-memory identity store. And then there's this work that's going on right now with JWT alignment with the microprofile bridge specification. So this is marrying the JWT and the Jakarta security kind of together. So it's a bridge specification between the two of them. The microprofile bridge did not make it in that last check into 7, but that will be hopefully coming. And then going forward, we're hoping with Jakarta EE 12 or later to get finally their roles allowed and run as added to it, so you don't have to use EJBs for that. And this is an example of an in-memory identity store with an annotation. This makes testing and prototyping much easier, less stuff that you actually have to set up. Okay, with Jakarta data, this is the newest specification that was added. This is a higher level repository data abstraction like Delta Spike data or Spring data. It automatically generates the repository implementation for you based upon an annotated interface. And it works with both Jakarta persistence, aka JPA, Hibernate, as well as the NoSQL implementation. So you can use this to generate basic CRUD find repository for data for both SQL databases as well as NoSQL databases, with those being like Neo4j, CouchDB, etc. So it works with both of them. So within the basic concepts within Jakarta data are the entity, which represents the data, and then the repository, which defines the operations related to the entities. So this is a simple example here. So up above we have our entity, and this could be a NoSQL or a JPA one where you're storing it in a relational database. And then our repository, which is going to provide our basic CRUD operations for the application. So it's defining that we have a basic CRUD, and we can provide methods, and it's annotation based, and then you can inject this into your code. So this saves you from the problem of writing boilerplate code to do the basic CRUD operations, right? So I always kind of cringe every time I have to write a basic CRUD API. It's like, I've been doing this for how many years? Is this what my life is going to be? So it simplifies that and is a much easier way of implementing it. The Jakarta servlet specification allows the control of status codes and response body when sending a redirect. Burned by that one. Added query string to attribute to error dispatches. Added finally constants for HTTP status codes, and added overloaded methods that use the char set rather than just a string. So a bunch of minor enhancements in Jakarta Servlet 6.1. So other changes in the platform were Java SE record support for validation. The managed bean is finally deprecated. The security manager, as I mentioned, is getting removed. On CDE, priority was added for producers, and JSON merge patch was added on the JAX-RS stuff. Now moving into Jakarta EE 12, and this is where the community, as a Java users group down here, can get involved. There's many different things that could go into Jakarta 12, which is being defined right now. The slides I'm going to go over show you some of the proposed features or what could be added. So the first one is Jakarta messaging. So this Jakarta messaging hasn't been updated in a while since the 2.0 release. There haven't been any major changes to it. So basically, talking about doing a more CDI-based modernized message listener, enabling you to use it in a standalone application without writing a message-driven bean. Basically adding messaging for cloud-native uses, standalone Bootstrap API so that you can start it up outside of a container easily. And then, more importantly, which would be really nice to have, would be AMQP support, which would enable interoperability with more of the cloud stuff like Microsoft Azure Service Bus, AWS MQ, Google Cloud Pub Subs type stuff. So that would bring kind of this part of Jakarta EE more into the cloud type thing. So if that's something that you've been wanting or would like, definitely do get involved in the specifications on that. This is what we had kind of proposed in the Jakarta EE ambassadors. That would be nice if we could have a message scoped bean with a message listener, not have to use JMS beans, and then being able to easily bootstrap it in an application. Jakarta MVC has been around for a number of years. It is a standard-based web framework. It has continued to evolve, and we'd really like to get this one into the platform. It's based upon Jakarta REST. And I think it came very close one year to when Oracle was in charge, getting it actually integrated. So this is a simple example here with it's model view controller type for building applications. Jakarta NoSQL, this is another specification that we're hoping to push to finally get added into the core platform. So it's a specification for accessing NoSQL databases, as I mentioned. It basically is doing the same thing as JPA does for relational databases, except for NoSQL databases. So Neo4j, which is one of my favorites, CouchDB, you name it, MongoDB. So basically standardizing how you map and get information in and out of those databases. This is standalone right now, so you can actually use it. You don't have to wait for it to be integrated into the platform. You can actually download and begin using it today. So it is, it has been implemented. So this is just a simple example here of a NoSQL example with an entity that's being stored in a database. So this code you can actually use today. The other one, Jakarta configuration, this is pulling the microprofile configuration over into Jakarta because there's a real need in the platform for standardizing configuration. So this is a way of basically pulling in configuration into your Jakarta EE application, and hopefully not using system properties, which I still see many developers using, right, where you pass something into the container, stick it in server.xml, and then you read it in later. So this is basically standardizing it so you can inject your configuration into your application and pulling this. Right now, you can use Mock Your Profile, but we're trying to get this into the main Jakarta EE platform. We'd also like to see enhancements to Jakarta batching, basically moving the job definition over to Java so you don't have to work with the XML. Would be a nice enhancement. And there's many other ideas that we have for improving or adding things to Jakarta EE 12. So we'll kind of go over, there's the Jakarta EE tutorial that's up there for learning Jakarta EE. There's many Jakarta EE examples that we have up there on the website. So there's many different ways of contributing. You can join the Jakarta EE ambassadors, and we'll kind of guide you through how to contribute to the platform if needed, so that you can actually get involved and help drive some of these changes. For getting started with it, if you're new to Jakarta EE, we have a Jakarta EE starter page, which you pick which version of Jakarta EE you want and which container you want to use or what type of runtime environment you want to use. And it generates you a nice Maven-based project that you can easily stand up a project quickly. I also, for this presentation, put together, because that one the official one does not yet support Jakarta EE 11 because it's not out yet. I have a Jakarta EE 11 starter project that you can check out and to try out any of the features that I had in the slides here with the presentation. And then one kind of interesting tidbit as I was putting together this presentation, sometimes reading the specifications is hard and a little boring, right, when you're trying to figure out some of this new stuff that's coming out. So I would ask ChatGPT, can you explain to me how to, I want to quickly create an example of something that was in the specs. So the interesting thing was that ChatGPT, the new one, is familiar with Jakarta EE 11. However, it will completely BS you and create just random code. So I asked it, in this case, for what was it, the in-memory identity store, for an example of that. I'm trying to put this together for the presentation today. And it coughed up some code. I pasted it into the IDE, and that just flagged it red. And then I went and looked, I imported the top-level class. I went and looked at it. I don't know if it picked up some intermediate conversation in there. But I had, there were some times I tried different examples. Then I went off and tried different examples. Sometimes it got it right, and sometimes it just made stuff up and hallucinated. Here's some code to try. So, but it is aware of Jakarta EE 11, which I thought was interesting, and can make some suggestions sometimes that are valid. So in summary, Jakarta EE 11 is almost here, and it has many important changes that are worth checking out and upgrading. If you've already made the jump from Jakarta EE 8 to 10 to 9 or 10, this is a fairly easy jump. And one of the key ways so the important thing is to get involved now to help drive the features that you want to see. Because as I mentioned, your resume is probably full of these words. It's important that these technologies continue to move forward and move forward in ways that we want it to. There's no longer a marketing group that's trying to determine the features. So resources, there's the Jakarta One live stream coming up December 3rd, which is a Jakarta conference, mailing lists, Twitters, and everything else. There's multiple ways to find out information. It's pretty good. Jakarta One, the Jakarta organization, the Eclipse Foundation has a pretty good YouTube channel with different videos on the different things that are coming out as well. So with that, thank you. If anyone has any questions.